Okay, hi, back. And just to finish up the this particular section, so I just want to remind everybody the main reason why we're delving into what we are in postmodernity, and that is to see essentially what we're up against, basically, if we are actually going to forge into the future. And so what we're seeing at the turning point of postmodernity is that in almost every area of women's lives, marriage, finances, employment, even her body, and everything practically, she finds herself in a most precarious situation. She can't come into her own with any degree of respect or equanimity. It's almost when you look at it, when I look at it in retrospect, it's so obviously it seems so wow. It's hard to believe we were like typecast into this particular way of being, and roles that we played were so what society typically thought would be, female. It was very interesting, and of course, it's sort of you also understand how this would lead to a culmination, a breaking point that would have to happen because it was just too much, and boy, change did really happen, and change did occur in the in that early '60s movement. So basically, that's the beginning of this workbook, and there are questions that are after the workbook, and we were asked to reflect on them. I don't know. I'm going to read some of them here. What qualities were valued in women in the early '60s before the women's movement? And how did those qualities fit with the roles that women were supposed to fulfill? So you can see those qualities before the women's movement were, values of being, wanting to be taken care of, having subservient sort of role, I guess. So all the roles that we played seemed to portray these qualities that we had to fit. Yeah, it's awful, actually. And they're still part of us, so think about that, in some way that we definitely, with postmodernity, a lot of things change, but still a lot of things are the same. The second question, what strikes you most about the difference between the social world of the early '60s and the world today? Strikes you most about the differences between the social world of the early '60s and the world today? It's just completely different, right? I mean, in so many ways, we can see right through that, discrimination, and we don't act that way anymore. And in some ways we do, right? We still buy into the the feminine roles, and in so many ways we haven't changed. But the differences are that we can see where we've come in as far as careers have changed. We can do anything we want to do. We can study in schools that don't turn us away. I mean, or limit what fields we are in. I mean, you name it. There's quite a lot of differences. And what connection do you have to this time of transition? Do you did you go through it? Did your mother, grandmother, other women you know contemplate how quickly this change came about? Yeah, it's interesting. I know my mom was a part of this transition, but in many ways she didn't really talk about it. My grandmother, I met very young, and only had one grandma who was alive. But I think she was ahead of her time in many ways. She wore pants, in other words, when women didn't. And but as far as this time of transition, yeah, I was born in the early '60s, so I was really young to really understand it. And by the time I was old enough to understand it, we really didn't talk about it much. It's just reading these workbooks is really where taking part of the virtual retreat with EnlightenX has really educated me a lot about where we've come from, and it is something to contemplate how quickly, really, in the scheme of things, all of this did come about, and how much time we don't have to really kind of catch up and close the gap. Anyway, that's all I have for now. The next section should be from one of the other sisters, our other sisters of New York. So thank you for listening.